And welcome to Hannity. And tonight we're broadcasting where this crowd would like to call Scott Waukesha, Wisconsin, where earlier this evening Governor Scott Walker officially announced that he's running for President of the United States. He will be our guest for the entire hour. But first, here's how it all went down earlier tonight.
America is a can-do kind of country. Unfortunately, we have a government in Washington that just can't quite seem to get the job done. The good news is it's not too late. We can turn things around. To do that, we need new, fresh leadership. Leadership with big, bold ideas from outside of Washington. The kind of leadership that knows how to get things done. I hear from people who say they're frustrated with politicians telling people what they're against and who they're against. Let me tell you what I'm for. I'm for reform, growth, safety. My record shows that I know how to fight and win. Now more than ever, America needs a president who will fight and win for America.
And joining us now for a one-hour cable exclusive interview, 2016 Republican presidential candidate, Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker. Want to welcome. They officially wanted me to say Scott Waukesha. So good to see you, Governor. How you been?
Hot place in here tonight, but they're on fire.
Yeah. Well, I got to tell you, you got to welcome that very few political candidates got. You got reaction from Hillary Clinton.
Yeah.
And you got reaction from the head of the AFL-CIO, Richard Trumka, who said Scott Walker is a national disgrace. Hillary said you're stomping on workers' rights. Is this something you'd be proud of, that the left is attacking you right out of the box?
Yeah, I think they recognize that we not only fight, we fight and win. We've won 3 times in 4 years in a purple, if not blue state. But more importantly, we won on the issues. I mean, the reason they're upset, the reason Hillary Clinton said what she said, was because we took power out of the hands of the big government union bosses and put it firmly into the hands of the hardworking people. That's good for taxpayers, it's pro-taxpayer, and it's pro-worker, because we gave them the freedom to choose.
You know, one of the things that I think is emerging in this political campaign is people want boldness. And you have not been afraid to take on some controversial issues. Obviously, what happened with the unions in this state, that was a big issue. But more importantly, you now, for example, somebody wants to get welfare in the state of Wisconsin, they got to have job training, drug tested. You defunded Planned Parenthood. You also said you want to have an abortion, you have to have an ultrasound first. Among other things. Tell us, is it hard for you to take these stands, or is that something that comes naturally?
Well, that's just who I am. I mean, for me, I'm a conservative. I'm an economic, fiscal, and social conservative. I think part of the reason why I've won 3 times, in fact, one of those victories is right here in this hall on the night of the recall victory, but part of the reason why we've done well is because not only does the base come out for us, and we had 96% the last go around, but we won independents by 11, almost 12-point margins, because I believe independents here and in other battleground states across America, what they want is not necessarily someone to move to the center, they want someone to lead. They want you to look square in the eyes, tell them what you're for, what you're going to do, and then go out and do it.
You're now the 15th entrant into this race. A lot of people before you. Why, and I guess it's just a cliched question, but I think an important one, why do you want to be president?
Well, I have 2 simple reasons. They were with me tonight. They're Matt and Alex. They're the same reason why Tonette and I decided to run for governor and why we decided to run for president. I want them to grow up in a country even greater than the one we inherited. And I just don't see that happening under 4 more years of these same failed policies of President Obama and now Hillary Clinton. I think we can do better. I don't think it's too late. I think we can turn things around. It wasn't too late in Wisconsin, certainly not too late in America.
It's interesting you say that. I don't think it's too late, and you said that in your speech earlier. My question is, how bad do you think things are?
Well, I think it's real hazard. I think, considering how far we are past the recession, we should be recovering at a much greater rate. When you think about all the power that's been amassed in Washington in the last several years, I mean, think about it. 6 of the top 10 counties last year, according to at least one report, 6 of the top 10 wealthiest counties in America were in and around Washington, D.C. That shows you that the Clinton and Obama strategy of the world is to grow the economy by growing Washington. I think you grow it in cities and states and communities all across the country. The other thing, and obviously we'll be talking some more about this, I'm sure, but I look at the state of where we stand in the world. I can't tell you how many foreign leaders and others have told me here and abroad, that the disengagement in America is a real threat to them, and it's to us, obviously.
We're going to get into that. It's interesting the line that you used, and I guess there's a battle between the gubernatorial candidates in the race and the senatorial candidates, and maybe Donald Trump is an outsider. But, you know, you said Washington can't seem to get the job done, or as you call it, the 68 miles surrounded by reality.
Right.
Why do you think Washington is so dysfunctional? And even Republicans, you know, seem to be disappointing conservatives a lot.
Well, I hear that a lot. As I go around the country, one of the things I hear a lot of frustration, a lot of interest in somebody from outside of Washington, with all due respect to the senators, is they feel like, hey, we elected a House, we now elected a Senate. They haven't even taken a vote on repealing Obamacare. There's a lot of frustration, angst out there. They're not getting serious about a whole array of other issues out there. And so I think people are hungry for leadership. What I've said, though, is even beyond just Washington, there's really two groups of candidates on the Republican side. A lot of great people, a lot of people I admire who are friends of mine, but there are fighters. A lot of those people are from Washington. They're fighters who get to win those fights. And then there are winners, people who won a lot of elections but have not consistently taken on the fights. I think what makes us unique is we've done both. We fought and won, and people's lives are better.
Because this is really about, I think, some people that are elected forget that they're supposed to be public servants. I think we've lost that. I want to go back to what you said about Republicans. They did vote 50 times to repeal Obamacare, not this Congress. And I would argue that they're symbolic votes, but when they had the power of the purse, they didn't use it. On executive amnesty, they ended up funding it because they were afraid they were going to be accused of shutting down the government. Describe the Republican Party in Washington. I would use an adjective for myself, timid and weak.
Well, there's some real challenges, although to me the opportunity I see is if we're going to keep the House for sure. I think there's a lot of key elections, but we keep the Senate. What I saw here in Wisconsin more than 4 years ago is when we came in, we elected new majorities. Everything was Democrat. We switched it all in the 2010 election. Assembly, Senate are two equivalents of the House and the Senate nationally, and then a Republican governor. And with the right leadership, the idea of going big and go bold, we brought along the kind of reforms because we worked together as a team. I think we can do that in Washington. I'm not giving up on our Republicans in Washington. They just need a leader in the White House who's actually going to lead.
You talked about three specific things: reform, growth, and safety. And then you went into detail.
Yeah.
This seems to be a platform that you want to solve problems. Okay, explain.
Well, yeah, to me, I go around the country, I hear people all the time say, I'm tired of politicians who just say what they're against and who they're against. I want to know, I want to vote for something and for someone, and so I've laid that out. To me, when it comes to reform, the fundamental essence of that is I want to take power out of Washington and send it back to our states, and in many cases back to our local communities. And take education. I think we'd be far better off. You looked at a dollar, I held a dollar up earlier and said, where would you rather spend this, in Washington or at your child's school? I think most people would rather spend it at school, and it's why we've got problems with Common Core and nationwide school board type initiatives. We need those powers back at the state and the local level. When I think of growth, it's about repealing Obamacare, reining in federal regulations that are like a wet blanket in the nation's economy, using the abundance of all the energy supplies that we have here to literally fuel our nation's economic recovery, helping people get the education and skills they need to succeed, and then lowering and reforming the tax code. Those are all things that will help us grow.
You said that we need a candidate that can win the Midwest.
Yeah.
You know, I look at states that are always out there, but just too far away. You just can't quite get them. Every election we wonder, is Pennsylvania going to be in play? You know, can Republicans win Ohio? Wisconsin, Michigan, Minnesota. If you become the nominee, can you deliver Wisconsin? Can you deliver Michigan?
I mean, I think the path to a Republican winning the presidency comes right through the Midwest. There's other important states. I'm going to be in a lot of those, but Iowa, Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, and I throw Pennsylvania in because they're in the Big Ten. But I think those are industrial Midwestern type states that we can do well in with a nominee who not only comes from there, because it's not enough geographically, it comes from there and speaks the language that not only energizes the base, but what we did, which was energize independents, people who want someone to stand up for the American worker. We haven't had enough people. You know, the left claims that they're for American workers, and they've just got really lame ideas, things like the minimum wage. Instead of focusing on that, we need to talk about how do we get people the skills and the education, the qualifications they need to take on careers that pay far more than the minimum wage.
I read an article that you are your own advisor more often than not. You've been in politics since 1993. You obviously seem to think a lot about these issues. Is that a good thing? Is that a plus? Is that a minus? In other words, explain.
Well, I think sometimes, particularly, places like the New York Times and others like to critique Republicans and think we're all.
I don't read the New York Times much anymore,
exactly.
Governor.
But it's one of those where the joke is they like to think that guys like me are somehow puppets of this organization or that, and then they write a piece last week about me being my own advisor. The truth be told, obviously, I couldn't put something together like this without a whole lot of great people on my staff. But I think what it really boils down to is I know who I am.
Yeah.
I'm not going to change to fit the times. I am who I am. I've been that way, and I think that's why I got elected, not just in a purple or blue state almost. I got elected in Milwaukee County, a county that went 2/3 for President Obama. I got elected there 3 times, again, because people wanted leadership.
In 4 years.
Yeah.
We're going to get into the specifics. How can we get Americans back to work? How can we balance the budget? What's your alternative for health care? How are we going to deal with immigration? Yep. We'll talk about social issues, Iran, ISIS. We got it all coming up. We're just getting things started. Governor Scott Walker, he's going to be our guest for the entire hour tonight. We'll ask him how he plans to fix the economy, get this country back on track, and much more as we continue from Scott Waukesha, Wisconsin. Straight ahead.
Understand that true freedom and prosperity do not come from the mighty hand of the government. They come from empowering people to control their own lives and their own destinies to the dignity that is born of work. Of work. That's what we stand for. Instead of the top-down government knows the best approach that you hear from so many in Washington, we need to build the economy from the ground up in a way that's new and fresh, organic and dynamic, that says as long as you don't violate the health and safety of your neighbor, go out and start your own career, build your own business, live your own life.
That was Governor Scott Walker earlier this evening when he announced he, in fact, is running for president of the United States. He joins us now for a cable exclusive interview. Governor, when you took office, what, unemployment was near 9%? Now it's
9.2% beginning of 2010. It was 8.1% right before you took office. Now it's 4.6.
4.6.
Labor participation rate is far greater than the national level. Unemployment is far lower. And we got to, we balanced our budget. We went from $3.6 billion in the hole to balanced budgets and surpluses in each of the last 4 years. And we cut property taxes. They're now lower today than
$2 billion.
$2 billion total tax cuts. Property taxes lower than we've started.
Okay, I'm listening to that. That's a good story.
Yeah.
Unemployment cut more than half. You got rid of a budget deficit. You now have a surplus.
Yeah.
Rainy day fund.
165 times bigger than we took off.
You got more people back to work.
Fully funded, putting people to work, getting them off of welfare.
So deficits become surpluses. Unemployment becomes more people employed in the state.
And even the amazing thing, for all that, the handful of hecklers that were out there and the 100,000 that were here a few
they said hi to me. They were glad to see me too.
A few years ago. Remember, they all said 4 years ago that public education was going to be devastated. Well, we got rid of seniority and tenure. We allowed people to hire and fire based on merit, pay based on performance. That means we can put the best and the brightest in our classroom. Graduation rates are up. ACT scores are now second best in the country.
That's a good story. Here's my question. If you become president, you're going to inherit $20 trillion in debt, $128 trillion in unfunded liabilities. You've got 50 million Americans in poverty, 46 million Americans on food stamps, 93 million Americans out of the labor force. A far more daunting problem. How do you fix that?
Well, I don't think it's too late. I'm an optimist. Part of the reason I came of age when Ronald Reagan first became president, and part of what I was drawn to wasn't just that he was a conservative Republican, it was his optimism in the American people. I believe we are up to the challenge, not just as a president. I believe the American people are up to the challenge.
How do we get there?
You do it in a couple different areas, and I talked about it tonight in those 3 areas: reform, growth, and safety, particularly in those first 2. Reform, I think you have to take big chunks of the federal government out of Washington, send it back to states. Medicaid, transportation, workforce development, even education. You take Medicaid.
You're talking about almost like getting rid of the transportation, education department and just fund the states?
Take those dollars and send it all right back to states. Because think about it, the states are more effective, more efficient, definitely more accountable to the American people. I've been at the state level, I've been at the local level. I can attest to that over and over again, all across this country.
So you mean you're almost talking about a major restructuring of government?
Big time reform, and I think that's what our founders intended, but it's even more visionary going forward. I think Americans understand it's a lot easier to talk to your town board member, your city council member, or even your state lawmaker than it is to not just someone in Congress, but someone in the federal bureaucracy. You do that, then it allows us to hone in on the things we should be doing, which starts with defense, the defense of our country. And I think we actually have to up that budget, but then take them on Social Security and other entitlements.
Are you really saying that you would take the transportation budget, divvy it up among the states, and let them handle it?
I think there are big chunks of programs like that. Medicaid,
education too?
Absolutely. Things like Paul Ryan talked about Medicaid, sending block grants back. If you sent block grants back in many of those other key areas, I think you could get far more effective use of those federal dollars at the state and the local level.
One of the things I was surprised.
It's not about getting rid of those things. It's about giving them
to the states where you think it'll be more efficient. One of the things I was surprised you said is you would end sequestration. As somebody who's looking at record deficits, debt, unfunded liabilities, to me it's the one one area of fiscal discipline I've ever seen in Washington.
It has been, but the key is, why did they have to do that? Because they had Republicans in the House, Democrats in the United States Senate, and the president, who was no way was going to be going down the path towards a balanced budget and to debt. I think if you got Republicans in the House and the Senate, and not just a Republican president, but a reform-minded president, I think it is appropriate for our defense budget to be higher than it is currently. I think that is a primary responsibility of the federal government. And then you've got to have the responsibility then and the courage to go out and take on the other big challenges.
All right, so I guess my question is, if you're going to have major reform and really hand those things back to the states, one question that keeps coming up is spending. We can't, President Obama will have doubled the debt, or accumulated as much debt as every other president before him combined.
Right, from George Washington to George W. Bush.
It's scary, isn't it?
Yeah.
So how do you stop baseline budgeting? How do you get their budget in balance like you are in Wisconsin?
Well, again, that's the two parts. By shifting major portions, you allow the part that's left. I think the problem is the left gives a free pass to government spending. They don't want any accountability. Sometimes those in our own party hate government so much they want to shrink it, which I'm for, but they don't want the little bit that's left to work. I think the federal government's too big, too expansive, too much a part of their life, and needs to be reined in. But for the part that's left that's necessary and reasonable, defense being a good example, we should make it work. It's not working effectively now. It's an outrage that we're not giving our men and women in uniform the resources they need to keep us safe. And that's something I think we could do better if we didn't have this enormous size of the federal government.
What about entitlements? I'm talking about Social Security, Medicare, both headed to bankruptcy.
Right.
What would be the reforms there?
Well, again, we'll lay out a detailed plan in the coming months, but I'd look at general parameters. For me, Social Security, I'm not going to touch anybody who's currently retired or near retirement. But for my generation and those younger, I think we all realize.
Mine too. There.
Well, I think we realize there has to be
means testing.
There has to, well, again, we'll lay out the specifics. We go ahead, but I think there need to be reasonable reforms because I think all of us know that we need to protect the people who made a decision about retirement, who are on it or near it now. But we also know it's not going to be around.
Would you raise the retirement age?
Well, again, those will all be parts of the plan we'll lay out. I'm first day in. I'm going to lay out some detailed plans in the future. Similarly, we need to do some things with Medicare, and that's why Medicaid is something that should go completely back to the states.
I know it's hard to give a less than 1 minute answer, but what would be your solution or alternative to Obamacare?
Oh, I think it's something where you put literally repeal it entirely, put patients and families back in charge directly. That means portability, carry that plan from one spot to another, be able to do it over state lines, provide full transparency so people know what they're actually getting into. If you give people skin in the game, they're going to make wise decisions about not just their health care, but their health.
Healthcare savings accounts?
Oh, absolutely. It was one of the first things I did was remove the state tax on health savings accounts right here because I wanted to give as many quality choices as possible.
Right. All right, we're going to come back. You guys enjoying yourself? What's the name of the town? Waukesha. Oh, okay. All right, well, when we come back, we'll ask Governor Walker what his foreign policy agenda is going to be if he's elected president. Later, he's also going to answer some of your questions, those you've been sending us on Facebook and Twitter, as we continue from Scott, Waukesha, Wisconsin. Straight ahead.
Sadly, today, under the Obama-Clinton doctrine, America is leading from behind. And that has us headed towards a disaster. Think about this. We got a president who drew a line in the sand and allowed it to be crossed. A president who called ISIS the JV squad, Yemen a success story, and Iran a place we can do business with. The greatest threat to future generations is radical Islamic terrorism, and we need to do something about it. We can start by lifting the political restrictions on our military personnel already in Iraq and empower them to help our Kurd and Sunni allies reclaim the territory taken by ISIS, because you know what? On behalf of your children and mine, I'd rather take the fight to them instead of wait till they bring the fight to us.
As we continue for the hour, we're joined by 2016 Republican presidential candidate, the governor of the great state of Wisconsin, Governor Scott Walker. Governor, I look at the world situation. Let me start with this Iranian deal.
Yeah.
Here you have the #1 state sponsor of terror, fights proxy wars, has broken every nuclear agreement they've ever been involved in. They say they won't allow inspectors. We're going to give them a bonus. Death to America, death to Israel, and the destruction of Israel is non-negotiable. What do you make of Obama getting this far with them?
Well, I think this is one of the biggest disasters of the Obama-Clinton doctrine out there. I mean, as we saw earlier tonight, I had Kevin Herman with me. Kevin was the youngest hostage of the 52 that were held for 444 days. He's originally from Oak Creek, Wisconsin, lives up the way in Wausau. And I had asked him to come even before this week because I wanted to make a point about how bad this Iran is. Iran is not a place we should do business with. Iran is not substantively different than the days when Kevin and those other hostages were released on Ronald Reagan's first day. And as president, on my very first day going forward, I would pull back. I would terminate that bad deal with Iran completely on day one. I would then put in place crippling economic sanctions against Iran, and I'd convince our allies to do the same. This is not a country we should be doing business with.
Have you been able to decode the president and his inability to say radical Islamic terrorism? Why can't he say that?
It is mind-boggling. I mean, you can't fight the enemy unless you can identify it. This is indeed radical Islamic terrorism. It comes in many forms, be it ISIS or Al-Qaeda or other elements out there. But we need to recognize that. And in Iraq, good example. It's not just ISIS. It's not just the Islamic State. The Iran-backed Shiite militias that are in there are, I think, in many ways, a very similar problem we face there. We see their impact not only in Iraq, we see it obviously in Syria. We've seen it in the last few months. And I mean, the president still, even until last year's administration, was calling Yemen a success story. The Houthis are directly connected to Iran out there.
In Yemen,
Iran is not, right, in Yemen with the Houthis there, that is not a place we should be doing business with. And we need to identify the enemy. And the enemy is radical Islamic terrorism in many different forms.
It's funny, the president came to town, and you've been traveling a lot. I guess you've been in Israel, and you met with a lot of, I guess, foreign ministers, and he said you need to bone up on foreign policy. What is your answer to the president?
Well, this from the guy who called ISIS the JV squad and Yemen a success story. I think a lot of Americans, regardless of party, question exactly what he's talking about. I think now more than ever, you see it there in the Middle East. You see it, though, in Russia. I mean, Putin operates under this principle that Lenin once had, that you probe with bayonets. If you find mush, you push. If you find steel, you stop. Under Obama and Clinton, sadly, Putin's found a lot of mush over the last few years. We need a foreign policy, United States, that stands up and puts steel in front of our enemies.
How would you deal with a Putin? How would you have dealt with Crimea? And
I think you look at it today going forward, we certainly need to give lethal force assistance to Ukraine. To me, I don't want to be the world's policeman, so I have a high standard for engaging in direct military engagement. I'm not going to put people's sons and daughters, husbands and wives, family members into harm's way unless there's a clear threat to our national security interests. But having said that, there are many ways we can assist. So in Ukraine, that means giving lethal assistance and making sure we can get those weapons and assistance directly to them. You go over a little bit and you think about the Baltics and Poland, our NATO allies. I think we need to work with NATO to put troops on the eastern border to make sure that Putin understands that there's steel there. And the irony is, whether it's the Middle East.
Did we make a mistake by not giving the missile defense?
Oh, huge mistake. I was there in 2008 with Ambassador Rick Graber when he had worked with the Czech Republic. He was in Prague. I was with him. But I talked about the work he had done in Poland and the Czech Republic. Incredible work to build local support region by region throughout those two countries. We had a great missile defense system. Within the first 6 months, this president gave it up. That is one of the many, many mistakes that have been made. You want to take on Putin, you need to send a clear message. He responds to strength just like others do around the world. And we've been leading from behind under the Clinton, under the Obama-Clinton doctrine.
You said at one point you wouldn't rule out boots on the ground in Iraq. Yeah, I know the question has been, knowing what we know now, should we have gone to Iraq? Isn't the bigger question, knowing what we know now, that ISIS has taken over Mosul and Tikrit and Fallujah and Ramadi?
Absolutely. I said two parts in that. When that question came up, I said, first, any president, knowing what they knew at the time, would have made a similar decision in regards to party. Heck, Hillary Clinton voted as a member of the United States Senate for authorizing legislation. So I don't get why they put that heap on, because, yeah, it's different now knowing something. But today, we know today essentially what Hillary Clinton and President Obama knew not too long ago when they made the decision to pull out early, even though many military and national security experts said that would lead to exactly what we see today. And I think you're right. That is the abundant question. I mean, think about it. Where in the world has Hillary Clinton had a role that isn't more messed up today than it was before she and the president took office?
How would you rate her time as Secretary of State? or even all the time she was in the White House, can you point to any specific success of hers?
I only think, not only can I not point to it, I've seen many of these focus groups that go on TV and elsewhere. I don't even think a lot of her supporters can tell you much other than she's got a lot of frequent flyer miles.
We played them.
That's a huge challenge for us, but I think it's a legitimate question. For us, that's part of the reason why I think I'm the best candidate to take on Hillary Clinton, because we're a new, fresh face. Obviously, she's someone from the past, we're from the future. I'm someone who's out of Washington, anti-Washington as you can get. Excuse me. She is of Washington. She lives there. She's worked there. She's been a part of it since her early days. But probably most importantly, we've actually gotten things done. We have fought and won, and people's lives are better because of it. Compare that to her time as Secretary of State in the United States Senate. How do you compare?
Senator Rubio said there's no way a governor can be ready on day one on foreign policy. I know you're friends with Senator Rubio.
I like him a lot, yeah. I just fundamentally disagree with that. I think, as I mentioned tonight, I believe the best president when it came to foreign policy and national security was a governor from California. I mean, think about it. Under his leadership, we rebuilt the military. We stood up for our allies. We stood up against our enemies. And most importantly, we stood up for American values. I think that's the kind of leadership people need. And remember, under his leadership, that led to one of the most peaceful times in modern American history.
Last question. Knowing what we know about Iran's ambitions, and they're spinning their centrifuges, they're enriching their uranium, they're building their missile systems up, they're telegraphing they want to destroy Israel, our closest ally. Do you think the time is coming that their nuclear sites will need to be taken out?
Well, again, as I've said many times before, unlike this president, I'm not going to signal to any of our adversaries as to how far I'm willing to go, be it troops on the ground or the amount of time we're going to be there. I think that is poor military strategy. And going forward, people are going to know that we're not going to look to engage. We're not going to be wanting to be the world's policeman. But when our national security risk, our national security interests, I should say, are at risk, and I believe Iran's a prime example, not just because they want to take out Israel, and they do. And by the way, we need to affirm that Israel is a strong ally of the United States. There can be no space, no daylight between our two countries. But on top of that, I mean, we believe they're in the process of developing intercontinental ballistic missiles 100%. That could be aimed right at American soil.
And you didn't rule out putting boots on the ground in Iraq again to maybe retake those cities taken over?
Not at all. I think right now, if we were to lift the political restrictions and empower the military personnel we have there today, a good example, we've got spotters out there who could call in more with greater precision airstrikes to be more effective at taking out the ISIS territory that they now have under control, and in turn then allow our allies, the Kurds and the Sunnis, to be more effective. We could do that in a way that allowed us to reclaim victory without putting a retreat into places like Syria.
We got to take a break. We'll come back. When we come back, we'll ask Governor Scott Walker what he thinks about his 2016 Republican rivals. We'll talk about immigration, some social issues, and then we'll turn it over to you to ask the governor some questions as we continue from Scott Waukesha, Wisconsin. Straight ahead.
In the Republican field, there are some who are good fighters. They haven't won those battles. There are others who've won elections but haven't consistently taken on the big fights. You showed you can do both. Now I'm running for president to fight and win for the American people.
For too long, they've said we have to compromise our principles to win. Scott Walker showed the path to victory is to run on our principles. Conservative, bold, decisive. He balanced budgets, cut taxes, beat the special interests, improved education, created jobs, and showed how to fight and win.
America needs new, fresh leadership with big, bold ideas from outside of Washington. Actually get things done.
Ed, still with us for a cable exclusive. We have 2016 Republican presidential candidate, the governor of Wisconsin. Scott Walker is with us. All right. Immigration, you once supported a path to citizenship. You don't any longer.
Nope.
Where do you stand on this?
To me, it's simple. It's one where I actually listened to the American people. I went to the border, met with governors, other elected
Governor
officials.
Abbott, right?
Governor Abbott took me to the border. He had me meet with state, local, as well as federal officials. I've talked to others from across the country, and it's clear. We need to secure the border. We need to enforce the law. Can't have amnesty. Citizenship should have a high bar. And when it comes to legal immigration going forward, we should give priority to American working families and their wages in a way that improves the American economy.
Can I interpret that as you secure the border first?
Absolutely. You can. Well, and as you know this, you've heard it. Many in the media immediately want to go to the end of the equation. I said you can't do it till you secure the border, and you need to do it for reasons far greater than immigration. You've been there. I've been there with Governor Abbott. Talked to others about
12 times.
it. Is a huge problem. It is. You've got international criminal organizations penetrating our southern border in a way that if it was in a water-based port on either side of our country, we'd be sending in the Coast Guard and the Navy, and yet they don't have the resources to deal with the cartels with drugs and firearms and human trafficking.
Let me ask you about a hire of yours that has angered conservatives. It's come up a lot in the news. Brent Bosell talks about Brad Dayspring is saying he besmirches the reputations of conservatives, et cetera, paid to do ugly work in the DC. Did you pay attention to any of those criticisms?
Well, he doesn't work for me. He works for one of those super PACs out there, but he doesn't work for me. And by law,
you're not allowed to say anything?
I can't tell any super PACs.
I did notice the Milwaukee Sentinel said that I might have been subpoenaed. Did you see that?
Oh, yeah.
Apparently.
Well, you look at all, I mean,
like,
think
why
about
am I subpoenaed?
Well, think about the IRS, and then think about on top of that now, we've seen in Wisconsin, the Government Accountability Board was actually tied in with that same IRS. No wonder they're going after conservatives.
All right. So after the same-sex marriage ruling, you said you want a constitutional amendment. Explain.
Well, I believe that marriage is between one man and one woman. I believe that for the last 20 years. I voted out in the legislature. I voted for it as a voter here in the state of Wisconsin. I defended it as governor. But obviously, like a lot of folks, I was frustrated with the Supreme Court decision. I point out at the time that the only recourse at that point is to support a constitutional amendment that would allow the decision to go back to the states. And I think Wisconsin, a lot of other states passed constitutional amendments to define marriage that way. They should have the right to do that. Going forward, though, I think obviously that's a high bar. It's a tough battle to have. I think the big focus we need going forward is to make sure that we protect those religious freedoms that are core to this nation.
You support public school vouchers. You have them in Milwaukee and
100%.
elsewhere.
We expanded them statewide under my leadership.
Yeah. Let me ask you about abortion. You wrote a commercial that got a lot of criticism, and you said you wrote it yourself, you looked in the camera, you did it yourself, and you said that you're going to leave the final decision to a woman and her doctor.
Yeah, let's be clear on that. The whole commercial says I'm pro-life, but I can only imagine how difficult the decision might be for someone to end their pregnancy.
Well, you remember the whole ad.
That's why I support, so I wrote it. I said I support giving a woman the information she needs, which was the ultrasound bill that I signed requiring an ultrasound. The #1 priority, Wisconsin right to life. I said the law, not my position on abortion. The law still leaves the ultimate decision up to a woman and her doctor. That's not my position on abortion. That's what the law does. But I knew if you gave people the opportunity to see an ultrasound, I just fundamentally believe, and I think the data shows it, that people are going to choose life over and over again when they can see their unborn child.
You defunded Planned Parenthood. You outlawed abortion after 20 weeks. You also said if somebody wants an abortion, you require an ultrasound.
I'm pro-life, 100%. It's why I've been supported.
You don't think it should be the law? You think it should be outlawed?
To me, I believe that when you think of an unborn child, that's a human life to me. It's why in Wisconsin, I called for and the legislature passed legislation that said at 5 months, when that unborn child can feel pain, at a minimum at that point, we should be protecting that life.
Let's talk about Hillary Clinton.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on her, and do you think she will be the nominee?
I do. I mean, I think it's less certain than it was in the past, but I still think in the end she'll be the nominee, which, like I said, I think is a great contrast. I think voters overwhelmingly, historically, if they get a chance to choose between someone new and from the future versus someone from the past, they're going to choose something new and fresh. And for us, you add to that, I mean, she embodies Washington. The problems of Washington, the way she's handled the Clinton cash issue and the emails and all, embodies what people expect out of the politicians from Washington.
All right, I'm going to mention names, one-word answers. Donald Trump.
Hey, he can speak for himself.
That's a good answer. Okay. I don't think he has any trouble.
I don't think he does either.
Barack Obama.
I think a failed presidency.
Let's talk about some of your competitors. Rand Paul.
I appreciate his focus on trying to reduce the size and scope of the federal government. I share that. I don't always share some of his beliefs when it comes to protecting the defense of this country. Yeah.
Rick Perry.
I love Rick Perry. Rick and I ride Harleys. We're both Eagle Scouts.
You're the only two that ride Harleys in this race?
We're the only two that ride Harleys.
My wife won't let me. Maybe you can help me negotiate that deal. What about Marco Rubio? Another friend?
I like Marco a lot. I mean, I have a preference towards governors, but I like Marco a lot. I think he's a good reformer.
John Kasich.
John and I are good friends. We like to have a little challenge between Ohio State and Wisconsin. And he beat me in football. We fared a little bit better in basketball.
Okay. If you had to pick a vice president today, you won the nomination,
You know, who knows? I mean,
what's wrong with that question? That's a fair question. What? Okay.
I think it's a little presumptuous. I got to earn my way to even being in that position. So I'm going to work hard in Iowa, in New Hampshire, in Nevada, and South Carolina, all across this great country.
And you're going to do the 99 city tour in Iowa?
I'm going to go the full Grassley in Iowa, do 99.
Right.
I'm going to try and get New Hampshire and through all 10 counties in my Harley. Right. I'm going to ride a little bit in South Carolina, Nevada, and elsewhere, too.
It's a lot of miles on that.
You got to have some fun on the bike.
All right, when we come back, the governor's going to answer some of your questions, those you have been sending us on Facebook and Twitter. As we continue from Wisconsin, we're glad you're with us.
America is one of the few places left in the world where it doesn't matter what class you were born into or what your parents did for a living. In America, you can do and be anything you want. That's the American spirit.
Welcome back to Hannity, and we're going to get to your questions for Governor Walker in just a second that you've been sending via Facebook and Twitter. I want to go back to Hillary. Polls show one after the other that 57% of the American people do not find her honest or trustworthy. Do you find her honest and trustworthy?
Well, I think there's some real questions.
That's a loaded question,
yeah.
I know.
Well, think about it. I think there's some real questions. I mean, think about it. I mean, not just the ones people think about right now. I think there's a fair number of reports out there that suggest that even while she was leaning in to tell the father of one of the victims in Benghazi if they were going to get the guy with the video, that she already knew that the video wasn't the reason for those actions.
They knew within an hour.
That's a disgrace. That's an outrage.
What do you think about somebody that erases not only their emails and then their server? We have a Records Act. They didn't follow that. What do you think about the Clinton Foundation?
Well, sadly, I talked about cybersecurity earlier in China. It may very well be that the government in China knows more about Hillary Clinton's email server than do the members of Congress.
I'm willing to buy it.
Yeah.
So I'm willing to raise money. I'd like to see it. Do you think that, are you prepared if you become the candidate for, this becomes a rich versus poor, old versus young, man versus woman, black versus white, you want to throw Granny over the cliff, you remember the Paul Ryan ad, and you want to poison the air and water? Because that's basically every Democratic campaign. How do you counter that?
Well, I mean, I think people just look at what we've done here. Three
you
times in 4
the air
years.
And water?
Well, 3 times in 4 years, I took on something like $100 million worth of attacks. We had every kind of attack from the left, from the AFL-CIO, the teachers union, AFSCME, the president came in, Clinton came in, Warren came in. They threw everything they could at us trying to take us out in the recall. And again, I think we've shown we can tackle.
Let's go to Cheryl on Twitter. She writes, Scott Walker, what sets you apart from the other candidates, and what are your top 3 priorities?
Well, I think it ties in what I said. There are a lot of great people, but a lot of fighters have yet to win, a lot of winners have yet to fight. I think what makes us different is we fight and we win for those common sense conservative values that people care about. Another
question. Will you follow through on your conservative campaign promises, or will it be another bait and switch?
No, I think if people look in our state, I mean, think of the list of every common sense conservative idea that people had in America, from right to work to tax cuts to welfare reform to entitlement reform. We've done it. We've done it. A pro-life agenda, protecting the right to keep and bear arms. We've done all those things in a blue state like Wisconsin. We can do it for America.
All right. I'm going to go to one Facebook question, and it says, if elected, do you support the current Republican leadership in Congress? If you don't, what influence would you use to push a change in leadership?
Well, I think the best thing we can do is lead with a big, bold agenda, not just tell people what we're against, tell people what we're for, and lay out a plan for the future in the areas I talked about, in reform, in growth, in safety. And I think then you got to act quickly. I tried to act on a lot of this in the first 100 days, just like 4 years ago when I was a governor. We acted on that, not just in the first 100 days, in some cases in the first 45 to 60 days, and that's how we got things done. You got to use that momentum to get the job done.
All right, when we come back, we'll continue more with Governor Scott Walker right after the break as Hannity continues from beautiful Wisconsin. Stay with us. And welcome back to Hannity. Now we continue with Scott Walker. Governor, we'd like to give the candidates the final minute. Make your pitch. Why you want people to vote for you for president?
Well, I think people want to see someone who can transfer power from Washington to the hands of the hardworking taxpayers across the country, someone who can stand up and help grow the economy in a way that makes sure that everyone can live their piece of the American dream, and ultimately someone who's going to protect our children, our grandchildren from radical Islamic terrorism and all the other threats in the world. And I think if you want someone who can fight and win for the hardworking people of this country, I'm your guy, because we've done it here in Wisconsin, and we can do it across America.
So you're off to Vegas?
Yeah.
then
South Carolina,
then New Hampshire, and 99, the full Grassley 99
that's right.
counties.
We start the full Grassley 99 counties in an RV.
All right, how many fried Twinkies, Oreos, pickles, and fried butter sticks are you going to have on the way?
I love it. Although I hear the joke about the deep fried butter on a stick that we have here in Wisconsin too. I heard a comedian say he was going to ask somebody about it, but everybody who's had it's died.
That's
so
true.
I don't.
Thank you, Governor.
Thanks.
Thank the Governor. Thank you, guys. That's all the time we have left this evening. As always, thank you for being with us. We'll see you back tomorrow night.